Look, a lot of people have been very critical of the recently released Google's Gemini 1.5 for essentially, in my words, I could say super woke in the negative connotation of that word. There is some almost hilariously absurd things that it does, like it modifies history, generating images of a black George Washington, or perhaps more seriously, something that you commented on Twitter, which is refusing to comment on or generate images of, or even descriptions of Tiananmen Square or the Tank Man, one of the most sort of legendary protest images in history. And of course, these images are highly censored by the Chinese government. And therefore, everybody started asking questions of what is the process of designing these LLMs? What is the role of censorship in these? So you commented on Twitter saying that open source is the answer. Can you explain?
I actually made that comment on just about every social network I can, and I've made that point multiple times in various forums. Here's my point of view on this. People can complain that AI systems are biased, and they generally are biased by the distribution of the training data that they've been trained on. That reflects biases in society, and that is potentially offensive to some people or potentially not. And some techniques to debias then become offensive to some people because of, historical incorrectness and things like that. And so you can ask two questions. The first question is it possible to produce an AI system that is not biased? And the answer is absolutely not. And it's not because of technological challenges, although there are technological challenges to that. It's because bias is in the eye of the beholder. Different ideas about what constitutes bias, for a lot of things. I mean, there are facts that are, indisputable, but there are a lot of opinions or things that can be expressed in different ways. And so you cannot have an unbiased system. That's just an impossibility. And so what's the answer to this? And the answer is the same answer that we've found in liberal democracy about the press. The press needs to be free and diverse. We have free speech for a good reason. Is because we don't want all of our information to come from a unique source, because that's opposite to the whole idea of democracy and progress of ideas and even science, right? In science, people have to argue for different opinions, and science makes progress when people disagree and they come up with an answer and, a consensus forms, right? And it's true in all democracies around the world. So there is a future is already happening where every single one of our interaction with the digital world will be mediated by AI systems. We're going to have smart glasses. You can already buy them from Meta, the Ray-Ban Meta, where, you can talk to them and they are connected with an LLM and you can get answers on any question you have. Or you can be looking at a monument and there is a camera in the system that in the glasses, you can ask it like, what can you tell me about this building or this monument? You can be looking at a menu in a foreign language and the thing will translate it for you, or we can do real-time translation if we speak different languages. So a lot of our interaction with the digital world are going to be mediated by those systems in the near future. Increasingly the search engines that we're going to use are not going to be search engines. They're going to be dialogue systems where you just ask a question and it will answer and then point you to perhaps an appropriate reference for it. But here is the thing. We cannot afford those systems to come from a handful of companies on the west coast of the US, because those systems will constitute the repository of all human knowledge. And we cannot have that be controlled by a small number of people, right? It has to be diverse. For the same reason, the press has to be diverse. So how do we get a diverse set of AI assistants? It's very expensive and difficult to train a base model, right? A base LLM at the moment. In the future, it might be something different, but at the moment, that's an LLM. So only a few companies can do this properly. If some of those top systems are open source, anybody can use them, anybody can fine-tune them. If we put in place some systems that allows any group of people, whether they are individual citizens, groups of citizens, government organizations, NGOs, companies, whatever, to take those open source systems, AI systems, and fine-tune them for their own purpose on their own data, then we're going to have a very large diversity of different AI systems that are specialized for all of those things, right? So I tell you, I talked to the French government quite a bit, and the French government will not accept that the digital diet of all their citizens be controlled by 3 companies on the west coast of the US. That's just not acceptable. It's a danger to democracy, regardless of how well-intentioned those companies are. And it's also a danger to local culture, to values, to language. I was talking with the founder of Infosys in India. He's funding a project to fine-tune Llama 2, the open source model produced by Meta, so that Llama 2 speaks all 22 official languages in India. I mean, you can't have any of this unless you have open source platforms. So with open source platforms, you can have AI systems that are not only diverse in terms of political opinions or things of that type, but in terms of language, culture, value systems, political opinions, technical abilities in various domains. And you can have an industry, an ecosystem of companies that fine-tune those open source systems for vertical applications in industry, right? You have, I don't know, a publisher has thousands of books and they want to build a system that allows a customer to just ask a question about the content of any of their books. You need to train on their proprietary data. You have a company, we have one within Meta, it's called MetaMate, and it's basically an LLM that can answer any question about internal stuff about the company. Very useful. A lot of companies want this, right? A lot of companies want this not just for their employees, but also for their customers, to take care of their customers. So the only way you're going to have an AI industry, the only way you're going to have AI systems that are not uniquely biased is if you have open source platforms on top of which any group can build specialized systems. The direction of inevitable direction of history is that the vast majority of AI systems will be built on top of open source platforms.
And on the topic of open source, Lex asks him, okay, if it's open source, how do you actually run a business based on open source? What are the economics of open source? And this has been proven over the years. We have a lot of very successful open source projects that have made a lot of money. Many of the standards that we use on the internet today, many of the standards that we use with databases, with code architecture, everything, a lot of that is open source. And there are a lot of benefits with open source, and a lot of companies have made a lot of money with open source. Just look at Android for Google, just as an example off the top of my head. So let's see what Jan says about the economics of Meta's open source contributions.
You have several business models, right? The business model that Meta is built around is you offer a service, and the financing of that service is either through ads or through business customers. So, for example, if you have an LLM that can help a mom and pop pizza place by talking to the customers through WhatsApp, and so the customers can order a pizza and the system will just ask them like, what topping do you want or what size, blah blah blah. The business will pay for that. And otherwise, if it's a system that is on the more kind of classical services, it can be ad supported, or there's several models. But the point is, if you have a big enough potential customer base and you need to build that system anyway for them, it doesn't hurt you to actually distribute it in open source.
And then Lex continues to press him about the open source economics. Why doesn't another company just come along, take that open source project and build competition? And that probably will happen, and that's probably good. But at the end of the day, Meta is still Meta. They have an entire multi-billion human user base to sell their products and services to. So let's see what he says.
The bet is more, we already have a huge user base and customer base, right? So it's going to be useful to them. Whatever we offer them is going to be useful, and there is a way to derive revenue from this. And it doesn't hurt that we provide that system, or the base model, right, the foundation model, in open source for others to build applications on top of it too. If those applications turn out to be useful for our customers, we can just buy it from them. It could be that they will improve the platform. In fact, we see this already. I mean, there is literally millions of downloads of Llama 2, and thousands of people who have provided ideas about how to make it better. So, this clearly accelerates progress to make the system available to a wide community of people. And there's literally thousands of businesses who are building applications with it. Meta's ability to derive revenue from this technology is not impaired by the distribution of base models in open source.
Now we continue on the whole biases front. Many employees at tech companies tend to lean left, and that is a point that Lex makes, and I tend to agree with. And so aren't those biases going to be built into large language models? And again, Jan points to open source being the answer.
I don't think the issue has to do with the political leaning of the people designing those systems. It has to do with the acceptability or political leanings of their customer base or audience, right? So a big company cannot afford to offend too many people. So they're going to make sure that whatever product they put out is safe, whatever that means. And it's very possible to overdo it. And it's also it's impossible to do it properly for everyone. You're not going to satisfy everyone. So that's what I said before. You cannot have a system that is unbiased, that is perceived as unbiased by everyone. It's going to be, you push it in one way, one set of people are going to see it as biased, and then you push it the other way, and another set of people is going to see it as biased. And then in addition to this, there's the issue of if you push the system perhaps a little too far in one direction, it's going to be non-factual, right? You're going to have, black Nazi soldiers in
yeah, so we should mention image generation of black Nazi soldiers, which is not factually accurate.
Right.
Yeah.
And can be offensive for some people as well, right? So, it's going to be impossible to kind of produce systems that are unbiased for everyone. So the only solution that I see is diversity.
And diversity in the full meaning of that word, diversity of in every possible way.
And continuing on the open source front, now they're going to talk about free speech, guardrails on AI, censorship, biases, and everything. I love this conversation. And hearing Jan frame open source in this light makes a ton of sense to me. Let's watch.
I mean, there are some limits to what, the same way there are limits to free speech, there has to be some limit to the kind of stuff that those systems might be authorized to produce, some guardrails. So, I mean, that's one thing I've been interested in, which is in the type of architecture that we were discussing before, where the output of a system is the result of an inference to satisfy an objective. That objective can include guardrails. And we can put guardrails in open source systems. I mean, if we eventually have systems that are built with this blueprint, we can put guardrails in those systems that guarantee that there is sort of a minimum set of guardrails that make the system non-dangerous and non-toxic, etc. Basic things that everybody would agree on. And then, the fine-tuning that people will add or the additional guardrails that people will add will kind of cater to their community.